And yes, indeed, we are back for 2019. It is a great pleasure to have you here in studio. We have the editor of Junkee, Rae Johnston. Welcome back for the first episode of 2019. Wow, I said that really fast. And they're away.
You did, but not as fast as I can talk, Mark. I bet I can talk faster than you.
This is a strange game for us to launch into so early in the year. But all right, let's commit to it. Alongside Rae Johnston, Ben Grubb is a writer whose work you can see in the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. All right, let's get through today. I'm just like scooting on past. Okay, so cars. Let's agree that probably in the future, cars might start driving themselves. And Hollywood is massively excited about this because they think if you're not driving, you might watch more TV. Or at least that's the plan. They anticipate a $200 billion industry will rise with commuters now becoming passive viewers in their cars. Let's just start with that estimation. Ben, is that a very generous estimation?
Well, I think, yes. It probably comes from the TV industry itself or Hollywood. I'm not too sure about that trend taking up. Yes, obviously, when autonomous cars become more of a reality, and we're already seeing that in California. Yes, there's been a few deaths, which is kind of putting that, but making people a little bit more cautious about whether we should continue down that track. But I'm the reason I'm kind of skeptical about it is that a lot of us are kind of glued to our smartphones and our tablet devices. I guess people will probably be using those more, wouldn't they, when they're in a car?
Well, see, I was thinking, Ray, that what's likely is that, yes, definitely, I think mobile phones will be a component, but increasingly we're seeing this trend where like every piece of technology you own sort of talks to each other. So, if the way your phone can kind of go, start watching something on your phone, if you can see me, I'm randomly poking in the air like a crazy person, and you start watching something on your phone, you hand it off to your TV. Presumably, if your car has a bigger screen, you could just hand it off to your car.
Yeah, absolutely. Or we could continue the trend that we're already on, which is just second screening everything. While you're sitting down watching Netflix, you're also scrolling through Twitter. It's just the reality of life. So it's background noise. It's something to keep you distracted and entertained. It's not too dissimilar to getting on a plane.
Yes.
You instantly put something on, but you might still be reading something, looking out the window. You can't scroll through Twitter while you're on a plane, which is probably why you are so immersed.
It's probably why you're more relaxed than you normally are.
Absolutely.
Hate-filled tube of lies is gone.
It'd be pretty cool, like if you were turning corners, like the screen, like I don't know, perhaps you didn't like the background that you were seeing on the outside world, so you could just click a button and then you're suddenly immersed in a different world, and you turn right and it turns right in this other world as well.
Isn't the thing with motion sickness that
you can't copy it too much, I think, or you get sick?
Well, my understanding has always been it's like what your eyes see and what your inner ear is telling you are two different things, because you're looking at a screen on your phone and that's why you're getting motion sick. Surely there's a version of that you would get in a car, even on a bigger screen, possibly even worse.
Absolutely. I mean, I get that looking at my phone, and I'm a grown adult and I still get car sick if I'm looking
at your phone right now. Look up.
I'm not. I'm looking at you.
They can't tell. They're listening on a podcast.
But yeah, it's the same kind of things that we've run into in the virtual reality industry. Some people are more susceptible to these sorts of things more than others. It will be a thing that pops up. What I'm really interested to see from this whole, hey, when you finally do trust these cars to drive you somewhere enough to have screens up all around you and to not be paying attention to the road at all, which is, I think, going to be a lot longer away than we think.
I reckon, yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing the crafting industry exploding.
The what now?
Yeah, just
people knitting in cars.
Knitting. People making stuff, people creating things. Because honestly, if I've got my commute time back, am I going to fill it with trying to find the one thing I haven't already watched on Netflix?
Just again.
I just had this image of myself sitting in the back of a car going, I can do this origami in a moving car. I can. No, I can't.
Is this my type A personality coming through?
Yes, it is. Okay. You weirdo.
Just be skeptical
be more
again.
Productive.
Of all of this. A lot more of us are already, pretty much in a driverless situation. We're in Ubers. We're not actually driving. And in those times, we're in the back seat. What are we doing? We're probably avoiding chatting to the Uber driver despite them wanting, and we probably want 5 stars, and then it gets very awkward. But with autonomous cars, I guess, you don't really have anyone to talk to.
The autonomous car's less needy. It doesn't need you to give it 5 stars.
Yes,
I know.
exactly.
Yeah, I think, on that vein, for the day-to-day commute, for people that have got shorter commutes, this might not be such a thing. My commute is fortunately that short that I can't even listen to a podcast during it.
Okay, I hate you both. I drive 90 minutes a day. Like I genuinely loathe you both. I should say that the reason we are talking about this is because in the last few weeks, the big CES Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas came forth, and one of a handful of companies actually did put up concepts of what in-car screens would look like. There was one particularly, I'm going to go with curious one, which basically had Batman. It was a Batman game in the middle of a car, and it really did remind me of Movie World. Did anyone ever go to Movie World where they had the Batman ride? That's exactly what it reminded me
So
of.
you've called it curious. The word you were looking for there is awesome, just to clarify.
Sure. I mean, what's interesting about it is if you look at it, what they've actually done is they've used all the screens around you. So they've got a screen in front of you, a screen on the side. So they've sort of replicated this sort of immersive experience. And I think, I mean, whilst it's obviously, it's a prototype at CES, there's a bunch of stuff there that's basically vaporware.
Yeah.
I do like that it demonstrates a new way of visual storytelling and potentials with that. And I always think that's a fun thing to explore.
Yeah,
I don't think, I mean, I like that Netflix show where you could choose your own adventure. Like that hasn't really been a thing until they kind of made it a thing. I'm not sure what...
Although ChooseCo, the company behind Choose Your Own Adventure, who are currently suing Netflix, would agree that they invented that thing.
But it would be really interesting. Like, what do you think might be the things that could come from that? Where could they innovate with the storytelling?
I think at the end of the day, the one thing that's been proven is as we've moved from theatre to film to TV to watching things on our phone to watching things on Netflix is actually the form of storytelling itself, TV shows, hasn't changed that dramatically. It's the small things on the side that have really drastic impact on the storytelling. Like, so, the example I would use is that the move from only telling stories in a broadcast environment that is structured around 5 ad breaks led to a very specific structure. Then when you move to an environment where it's a subscription TV model, the HBO model, where shows are not so much judged on their viewing numbers, they're judged on their ability to get people to subscribe. That meant that shows became more about prestige and in some way less about story points. And what I find interesting is as you look back over the history of popular culture and visual storytelling, it's often really small changes that have really big impact on the kinds of stories that we tell. Like the difference in like the golden age of TV, your Sopranos and whatnot, was brought in by a difference in financing structure rather than necessarily a technological shift. I don't know. What do you think changes about the way we watch in the next couple of years?
Look, I think that when you're looking at things like this, it's clearly a gimmick, and there's clearly only it's a one-time experience sort of deal. This Batman thing.
CES in its nature, then, yeah.
Absolutely. But I do think that you are going to always find creatives that are exploring different ways to tell those stories. I mean, we see it all the time in video games. Video games were, very commonly known as something where you're just shooting things or, putting blocks in something and
destroying the minds of children. How dare you?
Oh, absolutely. Melting their brains. So the idea of games being a storytelling medium, games being able to, capture, the oral history of Indigenous Alaskan people and preserve that in a beautiful, adorable, cute little game called Never Alone, by the way. You should play it. It's good.
Never Alone?
Never Alone.
Right, 3 times. That's a solid plug. I like it.
So that they could reach their youth who were disconnecting from culture and moving to the city. Like, you will find people that will use this technology for good and to further their cause. And you will find people looking at it going, this is what we've needed and what we've been waiting for. But it's not some big corporation top-down thing. It's always grassroots people that are using the technology that's invented for better.
I love when people use immersive entertainment, games, and yes, things like Bandersnatch, that thing on Netflix, part of Black Mirror. I love it when people use it in ways they weren't expecting. Exactly. And I think that's what's really interesting.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
That's also, it's hard with moments like this where somebody brings out a prototype. It's like in that moment, it's nothing but possibility. And we can evaluate what's financially feasible, what's not. And look, as you say, I think the take-up of driverless cars is probably going to be longer than people give it credit for. And a lot of the research says that people do really want to see what the car is doing.
Yeah.
So I think this is even further away because essentially what we're talking about is removing windows and replacing them with screens.
We're not even there on planes yet.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I think this is a really speculative piece of technology, but I think with the possibilities of that, you could get some really, really fascinating things. Let's say hypothetically the technology exists. What would you watch, Ben? Like what sort of things would appeal to you in that environment?
I would probably binge watch just the shows that I already watch on Netflix or Stan or any of the various other streaming providers. But this 270-degree version that was showcased by BMW and Warner Bros. At CES.
I love that you call them Warner Bros. Can I imagine them with like popped collars? Like, bro. Sorry, carry on.
We've seen like surround sound, on in movies for a little while now, but adding those few extra degrees, what are we seeing now on TV? It'd be like 180 or less, a little bit.
Well, it's whatever the lens is looking at, but with the additional screens, they reckon they're accounting for something in the vicinity of 270 degrees.
Yeah, so would these other things start happening on the sides of the car, I don't know, like they could put little Easter egg things in there and kind of make a game of that. I don't know. The
idea of three screens wrapping around the audience goes back at least 150 years. Like there was a very famous film about Napoleon, and this is where my retired film critic brain kicks into gear, where they told the story of Napoleon with three separate screens. But of course you had to sync up the film reels exactly perfectly, otherwise they would never work.
It's like a reverse theatre in the round.
And so this totally took off.
Completely took off. It was really successful, right up to a smell-o-vision. Hey, download this show is what you are listening to. It is your guide to the week in media, technology and culture. It goes without saying that in 2019, we're probably going to stream a lot more than we have in the years past. Over the summer break, you might have seen the news that Stan had gotten the rights to a whole bunch of Disney properties, and that was in part because Disney have removed themselves from Netflix as part of their new proposed Disney Plus streaming service, and we're going to see a lot more streaming services coming out of the US. But what's interesting, I think, at the moment is Apple. So Apple have said that they want to launch a streaming service that will be able to compete in prestige and content with the likes of Netflix and whatnot. But in the past, if you've wanted to use Apple services, by and large, you've needed to use an Apple device. I mean, you could get iTunes on a PC, so I guess there's some history to it. But what they did over the break was really fascinating. They've now announced that they're going to sell the Apple TV service on, shock horror, Samsung TVs. And I'm curious about why. What does this say about Apple and how they're thinking about their future? So, Rae, why would Apple get in bed with the enemy, who is also the company that make a lot of their internal chips? But anyway, let's go back to the idea. Why would Apple want to be on Samsung TVs?
It's pretty obvious market penetration. Yeah, they're putting themselves out there in front of a lot more people by being on competitors' devices, essentially.
Has it changed, though? Like, does this demonstrate a change in their strategy, though?
Yeah, look, I think it signifies a change in thinking for sure. Otherwise, we would have seen things like this happen before. I think Apple's focus on security and keeping everything walled off and within this ecosystem and not everywhere else and no one else gets in. I think that this shows not necessarily a relaxing of that, but maybe a bit more confidence in what they can provide on other platforms and still maintain that kind of integrity. But I think it also just shows bottom line is people are subscribing to Apple services more than they're buying Apple devices.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So there is a bit of a rise there in the amount of services that people are using from Apple. But also, streaming, no one's really buying stuff anymore. I say no one as a general term, but the last time you go buy a full album, buy a movie, even renting, everyone is just looking towards streaming services. Yeah. With their streaming service on the horizon, they want to be competing in this space where you've already got established players. So they need to be available in more places.
I read a really interesting piece, Ben, that suggested that this signified that Apple was shifting away from being a hardware company to being a service company, or sort of diversifying from being a primarily hardware company where that's the bulk of their money is made to being a service company. What's your understanding of what that actually means.
Well, they still make a lot of their money through the hardware and the iPhone particularly. But I think what was pointed out recently, a lot of people were upgrading their phones with Apple because they were kind of getting sluggish. And then there was that small or big controversy, depending on how you look. But there was a controversy around, they were actually deliberately slowing these phones down. So then they said, we won't do that anymore. We'll give you the option to kind of slow it down if your battery is kind of taking a hit based on performance. And then they noticed that people weren't upgrading their phones as often. And so now they've kind of...
It's almost like the planned obsolescence was a designed thing.
Yes. So now, they are facing an issue of, we need growth. And how do we get that growth? Well, I guess we need to diversify. So I don't think it's a pivot away from hardware. They'll still do hardware, but they're certainly focusing more on the services. Their services business has kind of been growing slowly over time. Like looking at a graph on Recode, it shows it like very barely kind of going above $10 billion per, I think I'm looking at quarters here, but it's quite small. But the only way that they can get growth is, they've kind of reached their peak iPhone, so maybe they need to reach out to these other devices, which is what they're doing. I didn't hear much about this announcement because I don't believe that it was actually made by Apple. It was made by Samsung, and also Apple don't really have they don't do CES, and haven't for a while now. Yeah, I think that this is probably the right thing for Apple to be doing. I don't know how much they will get out of it. Like they could have built their own TV a long time ago, and I thought that was meant to be.
It's been talked about. I mean, famously, Steve Jobs, towards the end of his life, he said, he leans into Walter Isaacson, the guy who was writing his book, and goes, "I think I've solved TV." I imagine he said it like Rosebud at the end of Citizen Kane. I don't know. I mean, but actually speaking about TV, one of the other bits of commentary that's come out of this is that, you can't really read this as anything other than a recognition that the Apple TV, the little device that you plug into your TV, has not really blown up in the way that, it probably should have. If it had proven to be vastly more successful, ubiquitous like iPhones and to an extent iPads have been, maybe they wouldn't be in this position.
You find a lot of the TVs now already have the smarts in them. Like they'll come with Netflix, they'll come with Stan, like at least in Australia and even overseas, like Android TV kind of took off because of the adoption from the main players in the TV land, kind of using it. So you don't really need that thing. And Chromecast is just so cheap. That's Google's equivalent, that you can just plug it in the back of almost any old TV as long as it has HDMI and it becomes a smart TV.
It's so funny that you say that because over summer I fired up, we have an Apple TV, and I fired it up for the first time in months. And the reason was because it was the only thing I could get Amazon Prime Video to work on my TV, because all of the other things, Stan, Netflix, and the standard iViews and SBS On Demands, they're all sort of baked into the TV. Yeah. But Amazon, for some reason, was the only thing I could access Amazon on a TV was the Apple TV. And it did strike me that if Amazon were available on, the built of TV that I have, I would have no real reason to turn it on.
Yeah, well, they get like, what is the killer feature for Apple TV? But like, some might argue that it's those
the TV.
But so with the Apple TV, perhaps it's those like scenescapes that they have of you put it on, you click menu twice, and
but SBS has slow TV now, so you don't need it, now do you?
Exactly.
Is that a commercial plug? I can't tell.
Yeah. I just sit there going, what city is this? What city are we looking at now? And you spend all your time Googling what screensaver you're looking at. But there's a barrier of entry there with the Apple TV that doesn't exist if you've got these apps built in on your television. So if you want people to be accessing your content and your future streaming service, it needs to be as accessible as possible.
Is it unreasonable to expect that, eventually all of these services, the Prime videos, all of it, should just be accessible on the TV? Like, I don't feel like it's a massively unreasonable ask.
It's not only unreasonable, it's inevitable. If they want to compete in this space, they need to be where their competitors are. It's like literally any other market.
It's really interesting because like this whole push towards like data portability and like was a thing maybe 10 years ago where the idea or the concept was that, you should be able to get a device and then use competitors' products on that device and so on. And then like Apple came along and was like, no, we're going to lock it all up, and everyone did the same. And now everyone's just kind of letting go because I think that they realize, one, maybe for the greater good, but also like they make more money They make way more money when they start to let everyone run, and consumers win as well, which is good.
So we'll see new streaming service from Apple, new streaming service from Disney, which probably won't be available in Australia. And we're now talking about Universal and Paramount. There's going to be lots of streaming services available overseas in the next year, which is good because I have to do the show every week and it'd be good to have something to talk about. Download This Show is what you are listening to. It is your guide to the week in media, technology and culture. And are all memes about to be banned? Because that apparently is the concern that is writhing through the internet. And you know who's at fault? Bloody Europe. I sound like a Brexiter. Well, sort of. There's a thing coming out of the EU called Article 13. It's a divisive new copyright plan that has certain corners of the internet really, really, really upset. And I will confess, I don't fully understand why.
Super, super simple version. At the moment, if you own the copyright to something and you see it put somewhere that you don't want it, you have to chase it down and you have to be the one that enforces anything that happens with that.
How is that any different to what happens now? When people
No, that is what happens
right,
now.
okay, good. I'm glad.
So I started with what happens now.
You're very
I
good at
tried
this.
to make this easy and you made it hard again.
You're really good at talking and I ruined it. I know. It's fine.
So basically now, if you own the copyright to something and you see it somewhere that it shouldn't be, you're like, hey, buddy, that's mine. Take it down or I'll sue you.
And that guy's like, I'm on the internet. I can do what you
Right?
want.
I'll do what I want. The internet's
West
forever. It's everywhere anyway. Regardless.
Internet person sounds like a tool.
Surprised.
Shock.
What this proposes to do, even though it's been voted in, but it hasn't come into effect yet and no one knows how it's quite going to work, is it puts the onus on the platforms themselves. So it would mean that YouTube has to chase down the copyright, people that have breached copyright. Facebook would have to do this. Twitter would have to do this. Reddit would have to do this, which we all know is just not going to happen.
I mean, Facebook might. There's so much attention on them now. They might. But Facebook's surely the least of the problems here.
I think they're struggling with what they're dealing with now, let alone adding another layer of things that they're responsible for. So
I can't talk right now, guys. I'm dealing with Russian hackers. Come back to me when you've got a slightly bigger problem. That's how I imagine they look at Mountain View right now.
So yeah, that's essentially the gist of it. But what would be the end result of that? You've got Article 11 that looks after links to other publications. It's arguing that they should be paid a fee for those to be hosted on Facebook. So, Ben or I write a story, it gets shared around on Facebook. Apparently we should get paid by Facebook to be able to do that. I'm not arguing with this.
I have no problems with that issue whatsoever.
I've got no problems with this.
I also think that like linking... tethering like journalism or content to Facebook's general view of the world is fraught. Okay, so when people are concerned about their memes being banned, I mean, I know you're saying it's only passed, it hasn't been applied, but is there a kernel of truth in that? Or have they got the wrong end of the stick?
Well, I think if it was actually possible to do all this, and that but I think that people just don't believe that that's actually going to be it's not, as Rae says, it's not really enforceable. I think that some of these like larger companies like YouTube, like they already have an algorithm that has like practically all the songs in the world or whatever, and then whenever someone uploads a video and it has that song or it sounds similar, they can go, oh, this is a song from this studio and they've said that you can't use this. Show us proof that you can use this. Maybe that's where they can start to enforce things like this. Yeah. But I just don't think that the algorithms are smart enough to pick, oh, you stole like 1/3 of a pixel on this meme that you collaborated with, or, you joined this image together with that image. Maybe that'll happen. I doubt it though. I
mean, there's image recognition.
It's totally, it's plausible, but whether that will actually happen. Though putting this into context of like how powerful Europe has been, like in terms of enforcing internet laws, like GDPR,
which is the big privacy law,
seemed to make everyone shake. And
every single. If you've had to click, we've said this before on the show, but if you've had to click through this website collects cookies and the reason everybody's had to click through that window in the last couple of months is because Europe changed their laws around privacy, and every tech company just went.
Or resubscribe to all of those emails.
So exactly. These companies are they're either based in Europe or they have European customers. So maybe Europe is like the arbiter of the internet now. They set the rules.
First they get to decide what's champagne and what's not. Now they get to decide the internet. I mean, so what is likely? I mean, push me out the other side of this. What is the likely outcome here? Based on seeing the power that they've exerted around GDPR, what is it actually going to look like in practice?
It has to come into effect. When it does come into effect, I think that the major players will spend a lot of money to try and be compliant. They'll do like a best effort, what they think is reasonable. They might start to adopt similar things to what like YouTube is doing. This will be like the larger players, the ones that can afford it. The smaller players, they're not going to have the money to invest, I don't think, into ensuring that they have that they are compliant. They'll do the best that they can do, but I don't think that they're going to be able to comply with it in the way that the law has been written. Yeah.
All right, well, we'll see how it plays out. Huge thank you to Rae Johnston, the editor of Junkee, for coming back on our very first episode of Download This Show for 2019.
Thanks for having me.
And Ben Grubb, thank you for coming back on Download This Show.
Thank you.
Hey, it's been an absolute joy to have you back in the new year. If you enjoyed this, please tell a friend. I'll wait. I'll sit here and wait. No, I'm kidding. I won't do that. But no, look, it's really helpful to have other people find the show. If you enjoy it, please let other people know. And as always, leave a review in whichever podcasting app you happen to encounter us in. I will catch you next week. My name is Mark Fennell, and thank you for listening to another episode of Download This Show.